And we have, for example, I've heard so many stories of Muslim men looking to get married, and they've had a wide range of sexual experiences, and they won't quote a virgin woman. Like, with all due respect, is that really in line with our tradition? That's incredibly hypocritical.
So welcome to POC Stories. Today I'm welcoming Sameera, and we are going to talk about what is all related to virginity and Muslim women, the struggle, the challenges they face, and so on. So welcome, Sameera. And can you introduce yourself?
Sure. It's nice to chat with you, Asa. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Sameera Quereshi, and I've been in the field of sexual health education with Muslims for about 12 years. So I've been working in Canada and the United States within Muslim spaces and now online to try and bring informative sexual health education from our tradition. So trying to tackle a lot of the taboo, struggling topics that we'll be talking about today.
Yeah. And so, how was it for you growing up and sex education? Because me, for example, I didn't have any sex education at all. Sex was a taboo. So, was it also your case? Or?
Yeah, mine was very similar. You know, my family immigrated to Canada from the United Kingdom when I was young, and a lot of immigrant parents, no matter where they move to, they're always worried about their kids keeping their Muslim identity. Mm-hmm. And there's always concern about Islamic values and what if our kids are exposed to things that we don't agree with. So there's this understanding that if we don't talk about topics, if we just protect our children, that's the best thing to do. So my parents did, I say, the best that they could and wanted to protect us ultimately. So we didn't really talk about sexual health because they thought that if we talk about it, it might make us curious and it's too early because we're young. So I grew up not getting a lot of information and realized that my parents were not informed about the challenges that Muslim youth face. So I learned a lot of what I know through work. And I think that's the case for so many, adult Muslims. We learn as we grow and we find information when we need it.
Yeah, exactly. So what kind of work do you do as a sex educator, for instance?
Yeah, so, I started this work in Islamic schools. So my work back then was working with younger youth, educating them about their body for the age that they were at. So let's say 9 or 10 years old and then older. And then now it's similar, but I'm kind of broadening out my work to be across all ages. So understanding that as Muslims, we have sexual health from birth to death. And it kind of grows and develops with us, like our physical health and our mental health and our spirituality does as well. So I'm trying to provide comprehensive sexual health education. From our tradition, though, I think all of the issues we faced are from misunderstanding Islam. And I think the only way to really correct that is to use our tradition. So all of my work's online and trying to help Muslims figure out not just the what, like we all know what the religious rulings are. There's a lot of focus on that, but we're struggling. So I think it's because we don't have the tools to implement our knowledge. We don't know how to follow through with our values, and we don't have a space to really ask questions because haram talk just shuts things down, and Muslims feel bad if they have questions. So it's all about opening up a space and helping Muslims say and realize it's okay to ask questions. Like Allah made us to want to know our bodies, and we can do it in a way that respects our Muslim identity as well.
Okay. And so what did motivate you to do this work? Is it because before you didn't have so much information regarding sex and you felt that was very necessary for the community, or?
So I think that came later. When I was working in the Islamic schools, we were looking at adolescents and we were realizing that so many of the issues that they were dealing with, for example, during puberty, it's because they didn't have information. The schools were not teaching them, comprehensive sexual health information. So I thought, why don't we create curriculum that is Islamic in nature and teach them about their bodies, and not just about, again, the rulings and religious purification, for example, but really going into why we should respect our bodies and respect the bodies of other people, for example. So my why initially was a gap, like a huge gap, like this work wasn't being done. And then I think when I was developing the curriculum, I kind of thought, okay, what did I want to know when I was young, right? So that's what really helped me create detailed information is I imagine myself as a 10-year-old, learning about puberty. And so I use that to develop content. And I think now it's all about wanting to help people reconnect with our faith. I think so many Muslims are struggling with Islam and are really frustrated with how it's being taught, especially with regards to sexual health and even mental health. And it's too bad because our tradition is so beautiful and there's a lot of spirituality. So I'm trying to bring that together with sexual health so that people have more compassionate spaces to learn.
So, so what did you notice for challenges and difficulties working over the years as sexual educator? Because I do think you encounter some challenges, as for example, some people that think that it's just that is going to pervert all the spirits and some the minds, and you're just encouraging people having sex, which is, I think, it's not what what you're doing, because I grew up in a conservative environment, and when we talk about sex, the way they see it is just like, oh, you want to encourage people to have sex. No, it's just we need to have this talk to how to rethink virginity when we are growing up in Western countries, because we are in hypersexualized societies, and we are overexposed to sex every time from a very young age. So that's why. So, what were the difficulties and challenges you faced?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there's a lot of challenges that Muslims are facing. I think the first one is we reduce sexual health down to sex and intimacy. So then we think, let's not talk about it until you're ready to get married. And we're only sexually active for a certain part of our life, but there's a lot that we have to know before. And Muslims just have a very narrow understanding because they see sexual health and think sex, like that's their understanding. I think other issues that come up is this concept of shame, which is this feeling of disconnection and unworthiness with regards to our sexual health. So when we feel ashamed about something, it really shuts things down, even the ability to talk or learn, because we feel that, we're being judged by other people or we're being judged by Allah. So as you said, it creates this idea that if we're learning about something, it's wrong. And that's not the case. I think Muslims overall don't understand that sexual health is very complicated. We oversimplify it and we think X equals Y. We know that, Allah created us as very complicated human beings and we all have different experiences. So we need to not oversimplify sex or even sexual health because it's complicated. And the issues we're seeing with pornography, the issues we're seeing with Muslims who are engaging in sex before marriage and they don't understand the consequences, they're not doing it safely. And also some Muslims are fine with that. Like, I think we have to talk about the fact that some Muslims are fine with engaging in sex before marriage. And we tend to just think that that's not the case because we want to shut that down. So, and I think parents are just scared of having this conversation with their kids. They're worried that it makes them more curious. And we know that it actually shuts down curiosity because kids know more about sex than their parents realize, from their friends and social media. So Muslims are getting information, but they're not getting it accurately and they're not getting it in line with our faith tradition, which causes problems. And I think that's what I'm seeing is so many issues and Muslims are reactive. We're now trying to solve issues and put out fires that could have been prevented had we had information younger and earlier. And I want to get us back. I want to get us to a point where we're not reactive, that we're empowering, and we're not always in a crisis mode because we're struggling with something with our sexual health.
Hmm. Okay. And what would be like the tools like to not being in always in this urge of, oh, I need to, like, what would be the tool like to not be in this crisis mode? Because I noticed with my personal experience, I'm always with this crisis mode, because as soon as I'm doing sex, I have then this guilt feeling, and I cannot shut it down. It's always coming back, coming back, coming back, because I am, yes, Allah is not going to forgive me because it's a sin, because I should have stayed virgin, and then I've got punished because I got some sexual traumatic experiences, and so on and so on. And it's like a vicious circle. It's not stopping. So what would be the tools?
Yeah, I've talked about the cycle of shame that Muslims have with sex, with menstruation, with a lot of different topics. So I often tell Muslims we have to start with gaining awareness of ourselves. And oftentimes, sexual health education is just don't have sex before marriage, it's haram. But we're not really giving Muslims the tools to be introspective. So I often tell Muslims, you need to dig deep and figure out what is the language and the thoughts that you're using to inform you. So what are your thoughts about sex, for example, about abstinence, about trauma? And figure out what the language is. What are you saying to yourself? Because those thoughts actually create our reality. And so, for example, if somebody is struggling with trauma because they've, experienced sexual violence and they're blaming themselves, I would say to that person, examine your thoughts about why you're blaming yourself. Why are you thinking Allah will punish you? People harm because it is their responsibility for harming. It was not your fault that a traumatic event happened to you. And so there's first of all gaining understanding about the inwardness and what we're experiencing on the inside. And then I think the next step is to gain accurate information. So for someone who's experienced trauma, for example, like you mentioned, learn about trauma and the impact on the soul and what holistic healing looks like. And that's a very personal, difficult journey. For somebody who is Muslim and is having sex before marriage and they have this voice inside that makes them feel guilty, I often tell them, you want to listen to that voice because it's telling you something. So it's telling you perhaps, hey, like maybe you're doing things that are not in line with who you are as a spiritual person. Maybe just take some time and reflect about why you're doing certain things. That I think is a compassionate way to dig into our consciousness and figure out where is that voice coming from and what is it telling me. And so often, like you said, we're not taught to just stop and think. We're often just kind of acting, and we're doing things sometimes on autopilot. And, being Muslim is a difficult journey, and sexual health is a difficult journey. And I think the more we can just pause, gain awareness, and learn, and we want to act in ways that are in line with who we are. And sometimes with Muslims, that's two different directions because they haven't had support to maybe process things. We want our path to be in line with who we are. And I think that starts with getting awareness about yourself.
As we are having like this social pressure, especially but on women to stay virgin, and how do you think? Because I personally think it's very damaging, and compared to this, I'm doing this binary perspective, but compared to the men who are like they have the freedom to explore and do whatever they want sexually. So how do you think can we prevent this huge social pressure upon women to stay virgin?
Yeah. I think one of the first things we have to do is address that double standard. Like you said, that binary, if we're using that example, Islamic spirituality doesn't differentiate between like men or women. Like we're all held in an equitable manner. And so I think we have to use our tradition to deconstruct that double standard because that double standard is causing a lot of harm. So I think first of all, we have to dig deeper into Islam and use holistic perspectives to completely undo that. We should all be receiving, equitable sexual health information. And I think the second part of that question is the way virginity is spoken about is not very holistic. It's taken on like this societal, puritanical, colonial ring to it. Virginity is often associated with a woman's honor and her hymen and, family honor. There isn't anything about that within our Islamic tradition. I mean, Islam does talk about saving oneself sexually before marriage, and yet I imagine it was done in a very compassionate, holistic way. And I think we're not giving Muslims kind of the tools, like you said, we're not empowering them to understand why. So many Muslims can't actually tell you why, like, what are the spiritual benefits of waiting for sex until marriage? And then also like how to remain abstinent. We can't repress sexual feelings, right? We can't just shove them down. Like, it's very challenging. And we have, for example, I've heard so many stories of Muslim men looking to get married, and they've had a wide range of sexual experiences, and they want, quote, a virgin woman. Like, with all due respect, is that really in line with our tradition? That's incredibly hypocritical. We can expect to make mistakes, and maybe by giving ourselves more compassion and information, we can figure out how to act in ways that are in line with spirituality. And that's the conversation that's not being had. And I think that's where we have to go. I think deconstructing virginity and then bringing in more compassionate perspectives and knowing that not everything will work for everyone. So, a lot of Muslims are like, well, just fast and you'll kill your sexual desire. And that's an Islamic advice that's given from the Quran. And that may not work for everyone. And there's other things that we can do. But until we understand the biggest picture, we're going to be, acting in ways that are not fully informed.
Yeah, that's a very good point regarding like abstinence and talking about the benefit of it, because we just talk about, oh, you have to stay virgin, but we don't talk about, and then we create like frustration because it's like, oh, it's forbidden for you. You don't have, but the man can do it, but you cannot. And we don't talk about the benefits of abstinence, and also like raising awareness on abstinence to men and the benefits of it. Also, we never discuss about it, and I think it's really important because I think this is how we're going also to unlearn the sexist and patriarchal views on virginity and
Yeah. And, as you say, the patriarchal kind of sexist views, the way that virginity is spoken about is very mind and body focused. And we cannot forget the soul. As Muslims, we also have a spirit. It's the soul that kind of goes through this journey while we're on earth. And I think until we understand our soul, like, where does lust and desire come from? How can marriage elevate our desire and lust because it's now a spiritual act of worship in marriage? So until we understand kind of the complexity, you're right. Like, it's just going to be a bunch of rules that apply to one gender and not the other. And then there's really no support because it just feels like something you have to do or you face hellfire. So it becomes very much fear-based, and we don't want fear-based. We want abstinence to be a very empowering choice that you're making, fully informed.
So we were talking about the shame feeling, this guilt feeling, and that many Muslim women have, even when they wait for marriage, and even when they wait until the marriage and they have sex for the first time, they have still this guilt, or I lost my virginity, and so on. And I wanted to know, like, what parents could do, like, to teach their little girls to avoid having this shame and guilt feeling, like having this over the years, and that can create so many difficulties, such as vaginism, for example, and so on.
Yes, I think it comes to parents. First of all, parents need support on how to teach their kids about their bodies. I think so many of them have their own fear and shame. And I've seen parents project that onto their kids. So they're uncomfortable. Their child asks a question, or they see their child doing something that they don't approve of. And all of a sudden their fear and shame comes out. And I've actually had parents reach out and say, I told my child that God will punish them. They're not animals. And I'm like, okay, I understand why you said that. And that's really harmful. Like, you need to fix that with your child, because you're giving them these ideas about their body that are not holistic. They're not compassionate. So I think supporting parents to understand that teaching kids about their body will not make them more curious. It'll do the opposite. And I think teaching parents that you can learn about your sexual health in a way that doesn't go against your values. So you can teach all Muslims about intimacy, their body, sexuality in a way that is very spiritual and dignified. It prepares them for marriage, and it actually helps them gain awareness about their body, because so many, for example, you mentioned women who get married and engage in intimacy, they don't even have awareness of their bodies. Of course, they're going to be scared and feel guilty and shame. They don't understand sexual pleasure. They're just feeling like disconnected from their sexuality, because it's not a light switch that goes on when the nikah papers are signed. Like, it's right. Like, we think that it's something that's shut down. So I think equipping parents to have these conversations starting from a young age, so that we understand our body and the responsibility that comes with it, because it's sacred. I mean, Allah has given us one body ultimately, and we don't get another one. And I think framing it in that way gives children and youth empowerment to say, like, this is my body. God gave it to me. It is sacred, and I get to make decisions. And this is the information I need to know and why. That's a very different message than don't have sex before marriage, you'll go to hellfire. And so it's a big shift. And I think it can be done, because I honestly believe, looking at Hadith, that's the way it used to be done. And I think colonization, patriarchal views, and this modern world has scattered us away from communities that were collectivist, where we had scholars and elders and learned people educating us and supporting us. We don't have that. You know, I'm in the United States and you're in Europe. I mean, we're scattered now. Where has that community gone? And I think that's what we need to be doing online probably now, so that we're giving parents, for example, tools to support their kids.
Yeah, I totally agree, because this connection in, as you say, like it's we are more in a collectivist culture, and the fact that living in these Western countries, you don't know which person you can talk to and so on. And even if I grew up in France with a huge Muslim communities, it's just, in a way, something is very disconnected, and you're going to have those people coming to you. They are not a cleric and so on, but they feel entitled and saying to you, but no, I know that is true. You have to do this and do that and so on. And it's very problematic. And then you just create more and more misinformation and more traumas and so on.
Yes, a vicious cycle, like you said.
Right now, regarding like the fetishization of virgin women, because I experienced it a lot when that was really hilarious, because I was technically virgin, but that was not I don't think that was, I wouldn't consider myself a virgin, because I think it's another thing than just being physically virgin. And but all the time I had this reaction of, oh, mashallah, you're such a good woman, like having this paternalist and sexist views. And I was like, and I always told them, I am not virgin. This is not what you think. But for them, I was sacred. I was really like someone sacred. And then I don't tell you anymore because, you're virgin. Oh my God, I admire that. And yeah, there is a lot of this fetishization on virgin women. And I wanted to know if you had an idea, where is it coming from? Or because I thought about that, but actually I don't really understand where is it coming from.
Yeah, I think it might be a few different factors. One, I think, we've talked about the colonization of Islam that really began, I think it was in the 18th century. And a lot of Muslim responses to colonization from the outside was they interpreted it as God telling them that they are moving away from Islam. So I think that's when we started to see, very purist literal interpretations of the Quran and Hadith, such as Wahhabism, come up. And that meant that they were literally taking verses from the Quran. I mean, some people didn't even look at Hadith at all. They were like, it's the Quran, right? Or it's the Hadith Qudsi, the sacred 40 Hadiths. But I think that's when literal verses were literally taken and applied directly. So, there are verses about chastity and virginity, and some of them, I believe, were actually taken and put into mainstream Islamic education, because look at where most Islamic education comes from. It comes from the countries that have the most literal, narrow views of Islam. Countries where there's no spirituality or tradition. It's just been completely moved away. So I think that's one part of it. And then you have that filtering through imams and scholars. And we see it on YouTube, we see it on social media. There are scholars who talk about these topics in very black and white ways, and they take out the context, and they don't understand that understanding, the context of verses, it's an art, and it takes a lot of scholarship. And so it's not really helping Muslims to get, very concrete views about virginity given to them. I think the second part is how Muslims, I believe, I've said this before, we are so judgmental of other Muslims. We are the worst to our own people. We actually project a lot of our understandings of morality and God consciousness based on what other people look like, what we think they do, and what we hear about them from other people. So for example, I'll say that some Muslims, to make themselves feel like better Muslims, they put down other ones. She's not wearing hijab. Is that hijab? Is that modesty? Why aren't you wearing hijab? Who are you with? Why were you with them? All of these things are basically like bullying in a way. You try and make yourself feel better. You put down others. And it completely baffles me, because where in the Quran does it talk about the fact that we, astaghfirullah, can see someone's relationship with Allah? So we are now judging someone's relationship with God based on something that is actually none of our business and that we have no idea about. So that's what I want Muslims to know, is that there's a reason behind our behavior. And we don't often think about this as Muslims because we make ourselves feel morally better, right? But there's a reason why we do the things that we do. And this, with judgment of morality, is completely not in line with our tradition, because Allah says over and over again, like, turn inwards, focus on yourself, better your own soul. You're not meant to be looking at other Muslims and judging them. That was never done at the time of Islam's birth. I mean, where do we see examples of that in our tradition? Nowhere. So I think Muslims need to turn that attention inwards and realize that it tells them more about themselves than somebody else. And I think we have to redo our Islamic education, go back to our tradition, go back to spirituality, go back to all of those scholars that talked about, God consciousness and the soul. I think if we had more compassionate, love-based perspectives of Islam, that would actually help us in terms of how we talk about aspects like, for example, abstinence or virginity. And I don't even, to be honest, like using the word virginity, because when you and I say the word virgin, it brings up a lot of misunderstanding and myths. So I like talking about, empowered abstinence or, spiritual perspectives of abstinence, because the word virgin is just so loaded. It doesn't reflect, I don't think, a true Islamic understanding, because we mess it up with patriarchy and, colonialism.
Yeah, that's very true. And so how would you define empowered abstinence?
Yeah. So it's not just the what, which is what we focus on, it's the how and the why. So, teaching Muslims about where does lust and desire come from? Like, what part of our soul does it come from? And how can we help make ourselves, more aligned with our spirituality? So when we are about to make a sexual decision, we don't just go with our emotions or physical attraction. We stop and think about ourselves as a whole being. So for example, if I do something now in 2021, what may I think about it 5 years down the road? What is the impact on my soul, right? How am I going to be able to answer about my actions in the hereafter? Because, our soul is the witness to everything that we do. And this is not from a judgmental perspective, but more to say, like, we all are going to look back on our lives and reflect on what we've done. And why don't we kind of pause before making decisions to think about the future? So not just the emotions or the physical desire and attraction, but ultimately our soul. So when we're looking at empowered abstinence, it's holistic, right? We're not shutting it down with a religious ruling. We're saying this is a reality, it's a struggle. You're going to feel attraction when you're abstinent. That's a fact. You're going to want to engage perhaps in masturbation or in sexual activity. That's a fact. Because Allah gave us desire for a reason, right? It's not a bad thing. I mean, it's God-given. Let's understand the challenges that come up and what we can do to make decisions in line with all of us, not just our body and our mind.
Mm-hmm. Because there is also this conflict of regarding masturbation, and when we want to be in this road of abstinence, then we were like, okay, because I had also the struggle. Okay, I want to be abstinent, but at the same time, I want to explore my sexuality. But at the same time, I feel guilty. But at the same time, I have the shame. But it's always at the same time. At the same time, the contradictions are coming. So, like, what could be like how to figure out the right balance to find out if the way we want to be abstinent?
Yes, and everything you mentioned is a struggle. That's the reality that so many Muslims are facing. We don't talk about that though. We think it's an easy decision. We just should do it or we're immoral. And Allah created us to face struggle, so that's normal. So a few things I would first of all say, it's important to learn about religious perspectives based on the school of thought that you follow. Like, people focus on religious rulings only, and that's one part of it. So learn about, for example, different scholars have different views of masturbation. Some say it's completely permissible. Some say it's a last resort. So if you have a choice between masturbation and engaging in sexual intercourse, that you do masturbation as a, lesser form of going against Islamic practices, for example. And some people are like, no way, like masturbation is off the table. So there's different interpretations. So I would say, first of all, like, where do you fall in line with those? Like, what would be a Muslim's belief, for example? And then second, I would say to figure out like why you're doing what you're doing. So again, there's always kind of a reason. So some of us, when we're exposed to certain content, we actually get aroused and we feel desire. Is it because though you're in a relationship and you don't want to engage in sexual intercourse? Is it because it's a coping mechanism? Like you may want to masturbate because you're stressed or you've had trauma and it's a way for you to cope. We don't also talk about that. There are many reasons why someone may want to engage in masturbation, right? And then also in Muslim marriages, masturbation is foreplay. I mean, it's a way that spouses can engage in intimacy. We don't talk about that. We just think masturbation equals, somebody single or watching pornography, but we don't think about the full range of the topic. So I would say learn about Islamic perspectives, reflect on why, and then if you do have guilty feelings, figure out where they're coming from. Right? Guilt is different from shame, like you said. Guilt can help us realize, oh, am I like doing something that doesn't feel right for me? That can be helpful. And then this is hard, but also think about the pros and cons. So for us to really be spiritual also means what are the benefits and what may be the harms. I don't think we often think about that with our actions because sometimes our body and mind just pull us in a direction. Mm-hmm. And I think spirituality means being able to pause and say, okay, like what are the consequences? And then I also tell Muslims, like, seek guidance from Allah. Like, after you've done all of that, pray for guidance and pray to be kind of shown the right way. And ultimately, you're being able to be okay with your decision. And that's challenging because we don't know the aftermath or the consequences personally. So I think all of those together can help Muslims kind of, when they're in a good state of mind, right? Not when you're super distracted or feeling very, strong desire, for example, but you can sit and reflect on all of those aspects to gain more insight about what's going on and why.
Yeah, no, I agree. But yeah, as you say, that it's can be like difficult because also you have these cultural norms and this cultural also pressure, and also if you're not in a good state of mind, it depends on your mental health, and yeah, so many factors. So yeah,
Yeah. And, I think there's a lot of healing that needs to happen. Like, Muslims are, like you said, they face cultural pressure. There's families and communities that are, have a microscope on them. And there's a feeling of being like watched and scrutinized and being kind of also things being projected onto them. And this is challenging, but we can't change that right now, right? Like, no one can change our communities and societies. So one thing that may be helpful is to kind of turn inwards and figure out, okay, what can I control? And what can I kind of do myself to create some sort of like bubble or some sort of shield around me? Because I mean, yes, I would love, to click my fingers and Muslim communities are now compassionate and mind their own business and don't put pressures on women. And, inshallah, we'll get there. It's going to take a lot of work. So I often try and encourage Muslims, let's try and like figure out what grounds us and how we can be compassionate to ourselves, because that's all we can control. And Allah is ultimately also compassionate and merciful and is watching that. And so, inshallah, that going inward journey, it's difficult, but I think that's somewhere that we can begin.
yeah, I definitely agree because also having those kind of discussion, I don't see a lot online. Really, like Muslim women talking about sex is just it's not happening so much, to be honest. And whatever the language they are speaking, and so on. So I think it's really time like to talk about it because if we keep going in this taboo, then this is going to get to get worse the situation, and yeah, I don't know. Like there is no solution for the moment, but because at the same time I want to be like to have a lot of hope, but at the same time when I see the reality I'm like, oh, it's not
Yeah.
because I am in my bubble. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, I'm super aware of many things, and I want to talk I want to detabooise a lot of topics regarding in the Muslim communities, and you have people like me and so on and so on. But then when I see Muslim communities in France, it's the same that when I was young, when I was a little child, always the same repetitive mechanism. And I'm like, ah, yeah.
It's frustrating.
Yeah.
I before, starting my own business and focusing on sexual health, I worked a lot in the sexual violence field. So I was talking and traveling to Muslim communities in the US and talking about like what is abuse and harassment and healing and why does it happen. And I remember having that exact same feeling of this is such a big issue, it's not going to change. And it would really frustrate me. And it felt like, the work is never going to end. And one thing that I realized when I looked at Islamic spirituality is, and this was like something that changed my perspective, is that, Allah will not change the condition of a people until they change what is in themselves. So oftentimes, you're putting out these narratives and such important stories out onto your platform, and I'm trying to educate people. And I know in the back of my mind that until we as individuals go inwards, nothing's going to change, right? And that's the difficult work that we're not taught about, and we don't have spaces online. We think that the more work we do outside in the world will change things. Ultimately, we don't have the power to do that, which is why, issues exist, because we're not changing ourselves. And it can be frustrating when we're working in like public fields to try and educate people. And one thing I keep reminding myself of is, I'm an educator, and also my biggest work is myself, because there is an understanding Islamically that when you work on yourself, that actually starts, rippling throughout who you come in contact with. And so that's something that I'm thinking a lot about, and will hopefully, help the frustration that we feel with, 30 years later, we're still dealing with this. I'm hopeful that if we turn inwards, inshallah, that Allah will start to change things as well. And that's all we can control is ourselves ultimately.
Yeah, I agree. And is there anything else you would like to say, or?
Um, I would say that, we talked a lot about the struggles that Muslims face. And I would say to people that whatever struggle you're facing, you're not the only one. Like you mentioned, like with vaginismus during marriage with sex, that's very common. So, having dealt with trauma, that's very common. So for Muslims who are listening, whatever your struggle is, you're not the only one. There's probably, hundreds of other Muslims also struggling with it. So I would just say, don't shut it down. Like, don't shut yourself down. Like, seek support if you need, reach out to professionals, seek guidance, and realize that it's happening and it's not in your head, like it's real. And to be able to seek support is really important.
Yeah, definitely. And I also wanted to add that it's not like this discussion is not to generalize to all Muslim in the world. Like we are like 1 billion, I think. So we cannot generalize this narrative to 1 billion people. Okay. So
That's exactly right. I always say, like, take what works and then leave the rest, right? Like it's not meant for everyone. We're not a monolith. We're very, very diverse.
exactly. And what we are talking about is from our perspective and experiences. So that's all we can talk about.
That's right. That's right. That's very well said.
Yeah.